A freezer, a body, and a $30 sale. It started with a deal too good to be true. A $30 chest freezer, cold and clean, bought off a front lawn on a slow Georgia morning. The buyer, Sharon Daniels, a mother of two, was just looking for a way to store extra meat after a bulk grocery run. She didn't expect anything strange. Martha Cole had smiled at her, offered lemonade. It was just another neighborhood yard sale, the kind where folks haggle over toasters and boxes of old VHS tapes. That's what it seemed like anyway. But something felt off. The freezer was sealed with duct tape. Martha said it was to keep it shut during the move. Harmless. But when Sharon and her cousin finally peeled it open 2 days later, what they found inside was not meat. It was not old food. It was a man. Frozen, curled in a fetal position. Skin pale, stiff. A man who'd been dead a long, long time. The police came fast. Tape went up around the house Martha had just cleared out. The whispers started immediately. And the first question out of every neighbor's mouth was the same. Where's Walter? Walter Cole, Martha's husband. 64. Retired veteran. Quiet, always nodding politely at the corner store. Gone for weeks now, according to Martha. She'd told the sheriff's office he went out fishing 3 Sundays ago and never came back. She seemed heartbroken, said maybe he'd fallen in the water. Or wandered off. He had memory issues sometimes, she said. They filed a missing persons report. Nothing else came up. Until the freezer. When detectives unsealed the frozen remains and ran fingerprints, the answer came in minutes. The body was Walter Cole. But what chilled investigators even more was this. Based on tissue preservation and frost crystal patterns in his bone marrow, the coroner said Walter hadn't died recently. He'd been dead for over 2 years. 2 years. Not 3 weeks. And that meant one terrifying truth. Martha hadn't just sold a freezer. She had sold a corpse. This wasn't just a case of a missing man anymore. This was something deeper. More layered. More deliberate. Why had she lied? What else had she been hiding? What would make a woman freeze her own husband, then sell him in a chest freezer for $30? And more than anything, what kind of town had missed the signs all this time? If you're finding this story meaningful, we'd be grateful if you subscribe. Thank you. Missing husband or methodical fraud. 3 weeks before the freezer discovery, the call came in just after sunset. Martha's voice was calm. Almost too calm. My husband went out fishing Sunday morning, she told the dispatcher, and he ain't come back. The line crackled. There was no panic. No tears. Just that flat tone people sometimes use when they're rehearsing grief. Deputies drove out to the Cole residence, tucked behind a line of pine trees on the edge of Bartley, Georgia, a small town that could be missed with a blink on a highway. Martha met them in a faded housecoat. Said she didn't want to cause a fuss. Maybe Walter got turned around. Maybe he fell asleep in the truck somewhere. He did that sometimes. She offered them sweet tea. The story seemed simple enough. A man, retired and quiet, loved fishing. Took his beat-up Ford out one morning and vanished. It happened. Not often, but enough that police didn't press too hard, at least not at first. But small towns remember things, and people started whispering, because no one had seen Walter Cole in weeks. Months, maybe. Not at church. Not at the VA hall. Not even at Betty's diner, where he used to eat meatloaf every Thursday like clockwork. Martha said he'd been feeling poorly, staying home a lot. Said the fishing trip was him finally getting some fresh air. But there were no fishing poles missing from the shed. No gas receipts from the morning he supposedly left. No recent calls or texts on Walter's phone. Just one old voicemail from his sister, left back in November of the previous year. And then there was the bank. Detectives quietly pulled Walter's financial records. They expected nothing. Maybe some grocery store charges or a few Social Security deposits. But what they found was strange. Walter's VA benefits and pension checks, more than $2,000 each month, were still being deposited. Not strange on its own, but they were also being withdrawn. Every month. Same pattern. Same timing. Always in cash. Always from Martha's ATM card. It added up fast. Over $85,000 had been taken since the time Walter was now believed to have died. And that raised a new possibility, one much darker than a lost fisherman. Was this ever about a missing person? Or had it always been about the money? Investigators started pulling at the seams of Martha's story. And the more they tugged, the more it unraveled. This wasn't just a grieving widow. This was a woman who had carefully, methodically maintained the illusion of a living husband for years. And the real question no longer was, where's Walter? It was how long has she been lying? Ordinary town, quiet people, hidden things. Bartley, Georgia. Population just under 5,000. A town with one high school, 2 gas stations, and a main street where every shop window has a flag decal. The kind of place where people wave even if they don't know your name. Where the church parking lot fills up faster than the grocery store. Where trouble, when it comes, usually wears the face of a drunk driver or a teenager skipping curfew. On the surface, nothing about Bartley screamed mystery. It was the kind of quiet that felt eternal. That's why the Coles fit in so well. Martha and Walter moved to Bartley 21 years ago. Bought the old weatherboard house off Hemlock Street, near the post office. Walter was fresh out of the army. Martha worked part-time at the pharmacy downtown. They kept to themselves mostly. No kids, no loud arguments. Just yard work and Sunday sermons. People remembered Walter as polite. Stoic. Kept his shirts pressed, even in the Georgia heat. He'd sit outside on his porch most mornings, cup of coffee in one hand, the other resting on his knee like he was waiting for time to pass. Martha? Always neat. Floral dresses, hair pinned just so. Smiled with her mouth, not her eyes. Kind but distant. Helped out with church potlucks, handed out pies at the 4th of July bake sale. Nobody knew much about her past, and nobody asked. Because in towns like Bartley, the quiet ones earn trust by default. But trust can be a mask. Behind that calm life were little things. Small details that only became strange in hindsight. Walter hadn't been seen in nearly 2 years, but no one noticed. When someone finally asked about him at the diner, Martha said he was battling arthritis, didn't like to be seen in pain. When his barber mentioned he hadn't been in for a cut, she just smiled and said he'd let it grow out. It was only now, after the freezer, that people started to remember the odd silences. Like how she suddenly had more cash. Or how the windows on the left side of the house stayed shut, even in summer. Or how no one had been invited inside for years. Martha had become a mystery living in plain sight. And Walter? His absence had been explained away with such gentle precision, it never raised alarms. That was the thing about Bartley. It was quiet enough to hide a secret, and polite enough not to ask the wrong questions. But now the questions were loud, and the town was listening. What else had gone unnoticed? What else was hiding behind those porch curtains? The marriage nobody questioned until now. Martha and Walter Cole were never the kind of couple people gossiped about. They didn't argue in public. They didn't party. No police calls for noise or fights. To the outside world, they looked like a steady, solid pair. 2 people quietly aging into retirement, living out their days like clockwork. But quiet doesn't mean simple. And silence can be its own kind of scream. They met in their late 30s. Martha worked the pharmacy counter back then, all soft-spoken efficiency. Walter, recently discharged from the army after 20 years of service, came in for blood pressure medication and left with her phone number. They married within the year. Their life was built on routine. Walter handled the bills and kept to himself, often watching old westerns in the living room recliner. Martha gardened, baked, attended the occasional ladies' group at church. They never had children, never traveled, never made waves. Friends described their relationship as cordial, not passionate, not hostile, just quiet. But it's in the quiet where things start to fester. Behind the scenes, there were tensions nobody saw. Walter's health had been declining for years, minor strokes, joint pain, memory lapses. He'd grown withdrawn, even colder. Martha, always composed in public, sometimes snapped in private. A neighbor once overheard her yelling through the window, something about being tired of babysitting a ghost. But no one followed up. Not here. Not in Bartley. They each had their secrets. Walter had an ex-military pension, plus monthly disability checks from the VA, more than $2,500 a month. Enough to live on comfortably. Enough to become a motive. Martha had been browsing online forums. Ones about managing elder care, and what to do when your spouse becomes dependent. At least, that's what she told friends. But in her search history, investigators later found phrases like how to report a death without autopsy, and how long does antifreeze stay in the body. Still, no one suspected her of anything sinister. Because when Walter stopped showing up, Martha explained it away with a calm face and a soft voice. He's tired. He's resting more. He's just not up to company. And everyone believed her. For nearly 2 years. That's what made it so hard to swallow when the truth started unraveling. A man doesn't just disappear into a fishing trip. A marriage doesn't stay so quiet without someone learning how to lie. And in that house, with its thick curtains and locked basement door, something darker than distance had been growing between them. Now people wondered, was Walter ever just a sick man? Or had he been a prisoner in his own home, waiting for someone to see the truth? Pensions, panic, and a secret too cold to share. According to Martha, it all happened on a Thursday. A cold, gray morning in mid-January. Walter was in his chair, sipping instant coffee, watching a rerun of Bonanza. She said she stepped out to check the mail. When she came back, he wasn't breathing. No shout. No sound. Just slumped forward, eyes open. Gone. Her first instinct, she claimed, wasn't to call 911. It was to sit down. Just sit. In that quiet, she said, was the weight of 20 years. It felt like something cracked inside her. And then came the fear. She'd spent 2 decades caring for him, giving up the idea of work, of travel, of children. Now he was dead. But it wasn't grief that led her next step. It was panic. The pension checks. The VA benefits. The life they had was built around that money. She wasn't working anymore. Her savings were almost gone. No children to call. No family nearby. What would happen now? So she did nothing. That's what she told detectives later. That she sat with him for nearly an hour, her mind spinning. And then she got up, went into the basement, and cleared a space in the chest freezer. It had been used for frozen garden vegetables, venison, leftovers she couldn't bear to waste. Now it held something else. Martha wrapped Walter's body in a flannel sheet and plastic painter's tarp. She said it took her almost an hour to lift him down the stairs. No neighbors saw. No one heard. She laid him gently in the freezer, closed the lid, and then she went back upstairs. The next morning, she picked up her purse, went to the ATM, and withdrew $400 from his account. And she did the same every month for nearly 2 years. It was a grim routine. Groceries, electric bills, new curtains, a slow, quiet theft of a dead man's life. She canceled doctor's appointments, dodged questions, explained away his absence with care. It was almost like she was keeping up a performance, a widow who refused to wear black. When police uncovered this story, Martha insisted she didn't kill him, that she was scared, that she just wanted time to figure out what to do. But 2 years passed, 2 birthdays, 2 Christmases, a whole pandemic. And all that time, Walter's body stayed frozen beneath cans of soup and frozen stew. Then came the estate sale. Martha decided to downsize, said the house was too full. She sold furniture, books, knickknacks, and, without a second thought, listed the freezer. $30. Cash only. No refunds. And that decision is what finally exposed the secret she'd been sitting on for 2 long, frozen years. $72,000 and a smile. The numbers told their own story, cold, exact, and impossible to ignore. Investigators from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation pulled records from Walter Cole's bank account. Over the course of 21 months after his estimated time of death, more than $72,000 had been withdrawn. Steady monthly. Almost surgical in its rhythm. Martha had never missed a withdrawal. Some months she'd take out $1,500 in cash. Others, she'd write herself checks under Walter's name, adding notes like home repairs or medication expenses. The handwriting never changed. The signature? It wasn't perfect, but close enough not to raise red flags. And all of it was spent. Nothing saved. She paid utilities, bought groceries, paid off credit card debt. She even renewed her church tithes. To the outside world, nothing seemed out of place. No lavish spending. No sudden wealth. Just a woman aging into modest retirement. But to law enforcement, it looked like a 2-year embezzlement operation. One carried out in plain sight. When questioned, Martha didn't flinch. She admitted to keeping the money. Claimed it started as a temporary solution. Said she'd meant to report the death eventually. That she just needed time to get her affairs in order. But her version of eventually stretched into nearly 2 years. She told investigators she feared losing everything if she reported the death. That Walter's pension and disability checks were the only thing keeping her afloat. That without them, she would have lost the house. But they didn't buy it. Because at some point, survival turns into strategy. And Martha hadn't just stayed afloat. She had carefully navigated the system. She filed taxes in Walter's name, renewed his veteran's ID card online, forwarded his mail. She even called in a prescription refill for him 6 months after he died. It wasn't panic. It was planning. And neighbors had started to notice that smile of hers, the one she wore at the grocery store or during Sunday service. Not grief-stricken. Not lonely. Just steady. She still wore her wedding ring, still spoke of Walter in the present tense. To the average passerby, it might have seemed like denial. But to the detectives building a case, it looked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The lie had grown roots. And those $72,000 weren't just about bills. They were proof of intent. Proof that Martha didn't just hide a death, she exploited it. The only question left was whether she also caused it, because the medical examiner had found no signs of trauma. No wounds, no bruises. But death by natural causes leaves its own kind of fingerprint. And this case was about to turn even darker. Google searches and antifreeze clues. The turning point came not from blood or bruises, but from a browser history. In the days after Walter's frozen body was found, pressure mounted online. The story had gone viral. News vans circled the tiny Bartley police station. Twitter threads speculated wildly. And one question kept rising to the surface. If he really died of natural causes, why lie? Why freeze the body? Under that heat, investigators dug deeper. They seized Martha's laptop. At first, it looked ordinary. Email chains with her church group. Recipes for peach cobbler. A bookmarked weather page. But then they found the searches. Typed in late at night, around the time Walter's death was estimated. Poison that mimics stroke symptoms. Natural ways to make someone die in their sleep. Antifreeze smell in food. How much antifreeze is lethal to a human? How long does ethylene glycol stay in the system? The timestamps sent chills down the detectives' spines. And in Martha's basement, buried behind boxes of old holiday lights, they found a nearly empty bottle of automotive antifreeze. The brand? Prestone. Bright green. Harmless looking. But deadly. Ethylene glycol, the active chemical in most antifreeze, is sweet tasting, odorless when mixed, and toxic in small amounts. It's been used before, quietly, fatally, by those looking to cause undetectable deaths. In small doses, it causes confusion, slurred speech, and fatigue. In larger ones, it causes kidney failure, seizures, and death. And often it mimics natural health conditions. A stroke, a heart attack, a perfect poison if you're careful. At first, the local coroner had ruled the cause of death as undetermined. Walter's body was too frozen for clarity. But after the public pressure mounted, a second autopsy was performed, this time by an independent forensic pathologist out of Atlanta. That report changed everything. Tiny traces of ethylene glycol were found in Walter's kidney tissue, so small they could have been missed. But they were there. Enough to suggest ingestion. Enough to make natural causes unlikely. And just like that, the story shifted again. Martha's version crumbled under its own weight. It wasn't just a panicked widow hiding a dead husband. It was a woman who'd researched exactly how to kill without being caught. The money, the freezer, the forged signatures, all of it now looked like steps in a bigger, colder plan. And still, when asked point blank, Martha denied it. She insisted Walter had a stroke. That she had no idea how antifreeze ended up in his body. That the Google searches were morbid curiosity. But nobody believed her. Not anymore. Because when the facts start lining up like dominoes, all it takes is one last nudge for the whole story to fall. And that nudge was coming soon. The life insurance policy she forgot to cancel. The deeper investigators went, the more Martha's accident began to look like something else entirely. It wasn't just the antifreeze. It wasn't just the freezer. It was the paper trail she forgot to erase. 3 months before Walter Cole's estimated time of death, Martha met with a regional insurance agent just off Route 9. According to their notes, she was polite, prepared, and very specific. She wanted a new life insurance policy. One that covered natural death. No complicated riders. No delays in payout. She settled on a $200,000 policy, an impressive sum for a retired couple living modestly. When asked, she said it was to prepare for the future. She signed the papers. Paid the first premium in full. Walter never showed up for the medical exam. Instead, Martha insisted the nurse come to the house. She said Walter had bad arthritis. Couldn't travel far. When the nurse arrived, she said Walter was napping and asked if the physical could be skipped due to his pre-existing VA records. Somehow it slipped through. The policy went active just 2 weeks before his death. And Martha? She never filed the claim. That's what stunned investigators most. She had the motive, the plan, the document. But for nearly 2 years, she never once tried to collect. Why? Maybe she thought it would bring too much attention. Maybe she planned to wait long enough that no one would question it. Or maybe, just maybe, she knew something had gone wrong. That Walter's death, quiet as it was, might not have been as clean as she'd hoped. The insurance policy sat untouched in a lockbox under her bed, still sealed in its original envelope. But when the GBI opened it, the dates told a clear story. She didn't panic after Walter died. She planned for it before. The intent was layered: money from his pension to live on, money from the policy to start over. It was neat. Too neat. And if not for one decision, a $30 freezer sold at a yard sale, she might have pulled it off. When confronted with the policy, Martha's hands trembled. She told investigators, "I forgot I even had that." They didn't believe her. Because this wasn't a mistake. This was motive, method, and means, all tied up in one document with her signature at the bottom. The kind of paper that turns questions into charges. Fraud. Concealment of death. Premeditated intent. And one charge still on the table: murder. The town of Bartley had no frame of reference for this. People who grew up seeing Martha in pews on Sunday couldn't connect her to the woman now described in court filings. But they were starting to see the picture. And it was cold. Colder than a body in a freezer. A second autopsy reveals a hidden truth. Dr. Leon Hayes had seen a lot in his 27 years as a forensic pathologist, but even he wasn't prepared for the strange puzzle that came in the form of Walter Cole's frozen remains. The body had been preserved unnaturally well. Muscles stiff, tissues intact, organs nearly undamaged. Not by embalming, but by cold. It was like time had stopped for Walter. But death doesn't freeze clean. And as Dr. Hayes began the second autopsy, ordered after growing public outrage, it became clear that Martha's story wasn't just incomplete. It was deeply flawed. The first thing that caught his attention was the absence of any advanced decomposition that aligned with what investigators already knew. Walter had been frozen almost immediately after death. But it was the lab results that blew the case wide open. Traces of ethylene glycol, antifreeze, were present in his blood. The levels were low but unmistakable. The kind of amount that could slowly, silently shut down a man's organs over the course of hours, especially if mixed with food or drink. It explained the symptoms Martha described: confusion, slurred speech, disorientation. She claimed it was a stroke, but the chemical doesn't lie. The toxin had likely been ingested. Not a one-time dose. Probably slipped into drinks or meals gradually. A slow kill. Even more chilling? The consistency with which it had been administered. Not enough to alert him. Not enough to taste. Just enough to make him weak. Dependent. Quiet. Walter hadn't died suddenly. He'd been dying in that house for days. And Martha, by her own admission, had never called a doctor. Never took him to a hospital. Never asked anyone to check in. She watched. She waited. Then, she wrapped him up and lowered him into a freezer. Dr. Hayes documented it all. The slow-acting toxin. The signs of stress in the kidneys. The lack of any natural medical crisis. The quiet, engineered death. When presented with the new findings, prosecutors amended their charges. No longer just concealment. No longer just fraud. Now it was homicide. Premeditated. Calculated. Cold. Martha was arrested again, this time on suspicion of murder. Her bail was denied. Inside the courtroom, her lawyer tried to paint the picture of a desperate woman, drowning in caretaking. A moment of panic turned into years of lies. But the evidence painted a different story. One of a woman who had researched poison, purchased a policy, and carefully erased a man from the world while cashing in on the lie. The freezer had preserved more than Walter's body. It had preserved the truth. And now that truth was being thawed and laid bare for everyone to see. The town's suspicions had finally hardened into something else. Certainty. Neighbors start talking, and everything changes. Bartley had always been a town where folks kept to themselves, where gossip stuck mostly to high school football scores and who got too loud at the barbecue. But after Walter's body was found and Martha was arrested, the silence shattered. People started remembering things. Mrs. Delilah Rankin, who lived 3 doors down, recalled how Martha suddenly started asking for help hauling her trash to the curb. She always said Walter was resting, but that trash got heavier around the time he went missing, she told reporters. At church, one of the ushers, Mr. Jordan Price, said Walter used to help collect the offering plates. Then one Sunday he was just gone. Martha said he wasn't feeling well. But that was Easter, 2 years ago. And at Betty's diner, waitress Shonda Blake remembered something that haunted her now. She came in alone that morning. I said, "Where's your husband?" And she said, "Oh, he's cold these days. Won't come out for nothing." I thought she meant his arthritis. But now it all sounded different. The town turned inward. Suspicion cut through conversations like knives. Everyone who ever shook Martha's hand started wondering how much she had hidden behind that polite smile. Even her closest friend, Rena Matthews, admitted she'd had doubts. She stopped inviting people over, said the house was too messy. But she was always spotless. Martha lived to clean. It didn't make sense. At the supermarket, strangers whispered when her name came up in line. "She's the one who sold her husband in a freezer," someone muttered behind a shelf of cereal boxes. And then came the yard sale stories. Sharon Daniels, the woman who bought the freezer, had nightmares for weeks. I kept thinking, what if I never opened it? What if that man had stayed in there forever? Word spread quickly. The freezer sale was now legend. People showed up just to take pictures of the house. Reporters knocked on doors hoping for more pieces of the puzzle. But what really changed was the trust. The idea that something so dark could have been hiding behind lace curtains and garden flags. That a woman who once led Bible study could have poisoned her husband with antifreeze. The shock gave way to grief. Not just for Walter, but for what the town had missed. "Maybe we didn't want to see it," said Pastor Lionel Green. "Sometimes evil doesn't show up with a bang. Sometimes it smiles at you from the next pew." The town that once minded its business now couldn't stop asking questions. Why didn't anyone check in sooner? Why didn't someone call when Walter disappeared? Why did it take a $30 yard sale for the truth to come out? And most painfully, what else might they be missing right now? Frozen grief, thawed lies. Inside the Bartley County Jail, under flickering fluorescent lights, Martha Cole finally broke. It wasn't a confession, not exactly. But during a recorded interview with detectives, her composure cracked like old paint. Gone was the calm, practiced tone she'd used on the 911 call. Now her voice trembled. Her eyes flicked around the room, not meeting anyone's gaze. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," she said. "I loved Walter. I took care of him. But love isn't always clean. And care doesn't always mean safety." She began to talk, slowly at first. About the fear of being alone. About the money drying up. About how the days stretched longer after Walter's first stroke. How he forgot things. Got meaner. Needed help to bathe. How she would sit in the bathroom, crying, wondering if this was what her life would be forever. Then came the chilling part. She admitted to researching antifreeze. "I read it didn't hurt him," she whispered. "That it made you sleepy. Peaceful." Detectives sat frozen. This wasn't panic. This was planning. Martha said she started by mixing small doses into his sweet tea. "Just a little. I wanted to make it easier for him," she said. "And for me." She called it mercy. But the timeline told a different story. Walter had no terminal illness. No diagnosis beyond mild dementia and joint pain. The doctors never warned of anything fatal. Yet his condition declined quickly after Martha's online searches began. Still, even now, she didn't call it murder. "I didn't kill him," she insisted. "I just helped him stop hurting." But when asked why she froze his body, she said nothing. Just stared at the floor. The weight of her lies had thawed in that interview room. And beneath them, what remained wasn't grief. It was guilt. Guilt, years old, stored cold in a freezer. The DA's office reviewed the tapes, calling it the most quietly disturbing interview we've ever heard. Not a killer screaming in rage or boasting about power, but a woman who spoke like she'd been carrying a secret that burned. Back in Bartley, reactions were mixed. Some saw a cold-blooded woman who took a man's life for money. Others saw someone crushed by years of invisible strain. "I don't condone what she did," said Mrs. Price from the post office, "but I can see how someone breaks, living alone with that much pressure." It created a strange rift in the community. Was Martha evil? Or just desperate? And did it matter? Because Walter was still dead. And no explanation could give him back his last moments, stolen in silence. Whatever the motive, Martha had made herself judge, nurse, and executioner. Now it would be up to 12 strangers to decide what came next. The freezer's journey and a chilling timeline. The old chest freezer had once been a wedding gift. White boxy, humming faintly in the corner of the Coles basement. For years, it held venison, frozen peaches, bags of pre-cut okra. A symbol of Southern practicality. Nothing more. Until it became a tomb. Investigators tracked the freezer's journey meticulously, hoping to stitch together a clear timeline. Receipts from local hardware stores confirmed that Martha bought extra-strength duct tape and heavy-duty plastic liners weeks before Walter's death. When asked why, she said she was sealing off drafty basement vents. But in truth, she had started preparing the freezer. Clearing it out. Cleaning it thoroughly. Making space. This wasn't improvisation. It was intention. Neighbors remembered seeing her dragging heavy garbage bags to the curb a few days after Walter supposedly left for fishing. She told them she was doing spring cleaning early. One even offered to help, but Martha refused. Said it was just junk. That was the first load of food in frozen storage, emptied to make room for Walter's body. When detectives analyzed the tape used to seal the freezer, they found it matched a roll discovered in Martha's basement. Same lot number. Same tear pattern. Evidence that she'd deliberately sealed the freezer to avoid discovery, even during a sale. And then came the estate sale. Flyers posted at the church bulletin board. Yard sale, furniture, kitchenware, freezer, everything must go. The buyer, Sharon Daniels, remembered how Martha seemed nervous when they discussed the freezer. She said, "Please don't open it until it settles. It leaks sometimes." And she looked right at me when she said it. Didn't blink. Once Sharon got it home, the plug was still wet with condensation. The freezer had been unplugged that morning. Inside, the air was still cool, but not cold enough. 2 days later, as she and her cousin lifted the lid, they were hit with an overwhelming chemical smell. Not rot. Not decay. Antifreeze. Under a layer of plastic sheeting was a shape. And then a foot. And then the panic set in. The police arrived within minutes. The freezer was hauled off and secured. Within 24 hours, the body was identified. Walter Cole. Time of death, estimated at 20 months prior, mid-January. Time of sale, 3 weeks ago. In those 20 months, Martha had lived with his body just feet beneath her kitchen floor. Hosting Bible study. Baking pies. Watching the news report on other people's tragedies. Never realizing hers would become one. The freezer, once filled with love, food, survival, now told a story of lies wrapped in plastic and pressed beneath frost. A story of a woman who chose cold silence over confession. And it was the only witness that had never stopped humming. Confrontation, confession, and calculated choices. The interrogation room was sterile, quiet, just a faint ticking from the clock on the wall. Martha sat alone at the table, hands folded tightly, eyes dry. The detectives across from her had been patient. Methodical. They knew the story they were unraveling didn't require yelling. It required precision. They laid out the evidence. The second autopsy. The antifreeze bottle. The Google searches. The forged checks. The life insurance policy. But it was the picture of the freezer, Walter's body curled like a comma beneath the plastic, that finally made her flinch. She looked away. Just for a second. Detective Griffin leaned in. "Martha," he said quietly, "you didn't just lose a husband. You made him disappear." That's when the tears came. Slow, trembling at first. Then a deep, raspy sob that seemed to come from somewhere buried. Not guilt. Not relief. Just exhaustion. She didn't confess to murder, not outright. But what she did say chilled the room. "I was tired," she whispered. "So tired. He needed help every day. Every hour. I stopped sleeping. He didn't even know who I was some mornings. And the bills." She trailed off. Detective Reyes asked the next question gently. "Did you poison him?" Martha didn't answer. But her silence said enough. She spoke instead about the night he died. Said he had trouble walking. Slurred speech. That he collapsed in the hallway. She didn't call 911. She didn't check for a pulse. She just sat beside him. Waiting. I told myself it was natural. That maybe God was helping us both. What followed next wasn't legal confession. But it was emotional admission. She told them she hadn't meant to hurt him. Just wanted some peace. Just needed time to think. But thinking turned into planning. And planning turned into crime. She admitted to faking Walter's signature. To cashing the checks. To sealing the freezer. To choosing to sell it when she finally decided to move away. "I couldn't carry him with me," she said. It was the closest thing to a confession they'd get. Later, her attorney would claim she was confused, grieving, manipulated during questioning. But the interview transcript told a different story, one of calculated choices, made one after the other, over months and months. And in those choices, prosecutors saw intent. Walter hadn't died in a moment of panic. He'd died over days, possibly weeks, as someone he trusted fed him poison masked in kindness. And Martha? She chose not to save him. She chose not to bury him. She chose not to tell the truth. She chose, again and again, to protect the lie. The confrontation had exposed it all. And now, there was no going back. The trial was coming. and Bartley was holding its breath. Courtroom drama and moral reckonings. The trial of Martha Cole began on a rainy Monday in early October. The sky hung low over Bartley County Courthouse, gray and unmoving, almost as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Inside, the room was packed. Locals filled every seat. Reporters lined the back wall, scribbling notes. And right in the front row sat Walter's sister, Evelyn, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes never leaving the woman who had once been her sister-in-law. Martha entered in a pale blue cardigan. Her face was thinner now, eyes hollow, no jewelry, no wedding ring. The charges were stacked against her. Felony theft by deception, concealment of death, fraudulent misrepresentation, and second-degree murder. Her defense team argued for sympathy. They painted her as a woman overwhelmed, emotionally battered by years of caregiving. Someone who cracked under pressure, made a terrible decision, and got buried beneath it. She panicked, the lawyer said. She lied. But that doesn't make her a killer. But the prosecution wasn't after sympathy. They had the antifreeze, the Google searches, the life insurance policy, the financial records, and the freezer. They described a woman who orchestrated every move like steps in a long, cold dance. Not out of fear, but out of calculation. She didn't panic, the prosecutor said. She planned. She poisoned. And when she was done, she packed him away like old leftovers. The courtroom sat still. Then came the witnesses. The insurance agent who sold her the policy. The neighbor who helped her lift the freezer into Sharon Daniels' truck. Sharon herself, visibly shaking as she recalled opening the lid. And the pathologist, Dr. Hayes, who explained in quiet, clinical terms how ethylene glycol works. It doesn't look violent, but it is. It shuts the body down. Slowly. Painfully. The defense tried to poke holes. They questioned the autopsy timing, the low concentration levels, the plausibility of motive. But it was Martha's own voice, played for the jury from the interrogation room, that sealed her fate. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I was tired. He didn't know who I was. And that's when the moral reckoning hit the town hardest. This wasn't some monster lurking in the shadows. This was Martha. Someone they knew. Trusted. Shared pews with. Traded pie recipes with. Could a woman just break that way? Could exhaustion really become murder? Some still whispered in her defense. Maybe she snapped, said one neighbor. You don't know what years of caregiving will do to someone. Others weren't so forgiving. She had a choice, said Evelyn Cole, voice steady, eyes red. And she chose to poison my brother instead of call a doctor. The jury deliberated for 3 days. In the end, the verdict came down like slow thunder. Guilty. Of fraud. Of concealment. And of second-degree murder. As Martha was led away in cuffs, the town let out a breath it didn't know it was holding. Justice, maybe. But peace? That would take much longer. Shadows in small places, a town changed forever. Bartley didn't go back to normal after the verdict. Not really. The church pew where Martha once sat every Sunday stayed empty. Her garden grew wild. Ivy climbed the mailbox, and no one dared pluck a single weed from her old property line. The house sat quiet, like it was holding a secret it no longer wanted to tell. People kept their voices low when they passed it. Kids on bikes pedaled a little faster. Even the wind seemed different there, heavier somehow. As if it remembered. Walter Cole was buried in the veterans section of the town cemetery. A small, flag-marked headstone. Evelyn visits every Thursday. She says she brings him news, talks to him about the trial, about the town. Sometimes she just sits in silence. I want him to be remembered, she told a local reporter. Not for how he was found, but for who he was. A good man. A quiet man. But in Bartley, the echoes of what happened still linger. Because this wasn't a story of a stranger. This was a story of one of their own. Someone who smiled at the checkout line, who made banana pudding for bake sales, who never missed a prayer circle. And she'd kept a body in her freezer for almost 2 years. The moral questions never stopped. Was Martha evil? Or was she exhausted? Was she a monster? Or a woman who lost her way? The trial answered what was legal. But what was right, that still split the town. Local pastors preached sermons on forgiveness. Mental health forums popped up at the community center. The high school even started a campaign on eldercare awareness, using Walter's story as a case study. His face, once only known to neighbors and war buddies, was now on national news. Not as a victim of war, but of trust. And that might be the deepest wound of all. Trust. Because in small towns, trust is currency. It's what holds the community together. what keeps doors unlocked and casseroles flowing during hard times. But now, everyone was looking just a little closer, asking a few more questions, and not assuming a smile meant everything was fine. Martha was sentenced to 25 years without parole. She didn't speak at her sentencing, didn't look at Evelyn, didn't cry. She just stood still, like the freeze had finally reached her too. And Bartley, Georgia? It moved on. Slowly. Carefully. But it didn't forget. Because some stories stay with a place. In the rustle of pine trees. In the hum of an old freezer that now sits in a police evidence locker. In the quiet moments when people wonder how many other secrets are still waiting. Hidden in basements, buried under silence, wrapped in smiles. Every story has two sides, but the truth waits in the shadows. Join us as we uncover the hidden truths, the unspoken betrayals, and the moments that define survival. Subscribe now to follow every twist and turn, because in the world of true crime, justice is just the beginning.